I understand your topic is focusing a lot on paleodemography. Is that right?
Right. I'm studying past population.
Okay.
With written sources and astrological sources.
So exactly, what kind of sources and data do you collect?
For historical demography, I collect written sources from periodical register, and for paleodemography, I'm most using skeleton data. So it's mean age and sex estimation based on biological indicators of growing and aging.
How do you, I mean, what these data are telling us about the past population? And when we say past population, which age are we talking about?
Well, for me, it's 2,000 years from the antiquity, the Roman period, and even if before, till the 18th centuries, because after the demographic behavior changed with the industrialization and urbanization and so on.
How do you get to understand or describe trends in this population using the data you have access to?
I'm most focusing on mortality behavior because it's easier with my data to calculate some mean age at death or some age for children or adult population, and see more than fertility. It's very difficult to measure fertility on a skeleton. I'm using mortality data, mortality index, to estimate if a population is growing well or if it's facing some difficulties, some demographic difficulties like famines, wars, and epidemics. Most.
Right, so very, very actual, very, yeah. Very currently relevant, right? And what are the limits of this kind of data? So you were already telling me a little bit what they can tell you and what they can't tell you.
Well, the limit is the small number of observed individuals. Well, there's very small population, so I have some statistical problems. I'm working with a statistician, of course, and mathematician to solve this problem of small population, and they are very small, so the standard error could be very important. So, especially for paleodemography, it's important to solve most of this problem because we have two problems: the small population, small samples, and very thin relation between the chronological age and the biological age, which is we can estimate from my data, from skeleton data.
And can you give me some example of which population you have been studying, or are there is it always the same site or location, or your samples come from different areas?
Well, for the moment, I mainly work on French population from antiquity period and medieval period. Early medieval period, we are able to calculate, to show the impacts of the difficulties faced by the population, mainly estimating the age, the mean age at death for adult population, seeing if it's growing or declining. And we saw it was very high in the Roman period, and it declined a lot after the 6th centuries BC because of the Justinian plague of famines and climatic modification and population movement also. So this we study this for the northern part of France, and I tried to get sample for a larger region, but still on work. And I'm working also with Mexican colleague on colonial population and pre-Hispanic population. This project is at the beginning. So just to share our knowledge, our method, and to see how to adapt them in another context, very different from the European one, no?
Exactly. No, it's super fascinating. I'm wondering also how much it changed during the time, the way you, like the tools you have at disposal, because I imagine genetics has been improving a lot, chemistry and biochemistry as well. So
yes, there are a lot of information can be collected from the skeleton, of course. But well, it's interdisciplinary work with paleoepidemiologists, with anthropologists doing isotopic analysis for diet, and migration, and so on. But I'm focusing on demographic behavior. So just to know if the population was able to survive by natural growth, or if he needs some external help with migration, or if it was too numerous and spread on the territory, and so on. So it's my topics are more on demographic, but of course, all the information about the health of population, the movement of population, the cultural aspect also are very, very useful to understand what we can do with so small samples.
It sounds a lot like a very detailed investigation, right? Because you have to, I suppose, to put all the little pieces in a...
And to be modest with the results, because I can't tell more that I'm studying than the area and the time period I am studying.
Give me an example of something that you found or that you're studying that changed the view of a population, because I know some example in Italy, for example, there is a lot of studying about the ancient Etruscan, the population from Tuscany, whether they were or not. I mean, we know that there is a lot of a mystery about how this population ended and whether they were absorbed or they were terminated somehow or whatever. So did you find something that you can share with us, some example?
No, not in this way, because in this way you need genetic information, no, more or less. So I have not. Just I have some archaeological information, historical information, telling us that some population arrived. Example, during the Roman time, there were soldiers from Roman army settled in Normandy. So we know that, but we have no proof, biological proof that they are very different population from the local one, except we can measure what is the impact of the arrival of new population in terms of mortality, surviving curves, and so on. So it's very little information, but it can be modelized. We can use it with modelization, like an agent-based model, and see with other information if they fit or not, or what could be the problem. So it's also very interesting working with archaeologists and so on to give them some demographic point of view and their feedback.
What these studies can tell us who are not researchers about our past, like what's the relevance or the importance of this kind of?
Well, for me, mainly in this context, I can measure the impact, the consequences of some difficulties, of some waves, epidemic waves, some population movement, and so on. And I can see that the population is heavily impacted for a long time, because what I'm measuring, it's a very, very few, very little information, and it's relevant. So that's, I can imagine that it was really great. And I make a comparison with the impact of the World War I in France, and showing that the decline in the mean age at death for man was in similar proportion that when I observed in an early medieval period in Normandy. So just to have an idea of the impact of this on the long term.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yes, because in contemporary period, for that moment, we cannot observe the consequences. We are just facing the difficulties, but not imagining the difficulties, the consequences in the long term.
And are you drawing any sort of indication or insight that can, I'm not saying that they can help us facing the trouble now, but telling something about how these will impact? For example, of course, now we are looking at the impact of the pandemics, right? And the pandemic is
the impact of the short period, but the impact could be on a very long period, very long, because the period I studied are 2 centuries. So the impact, yes, is still visible on a large period like that.
So in 2 centuries, you still see the impact of something like an epidemic.
I see one impact,
Okay.
not still, because I don't know, it's just a mean point, but I can see that the impact was huge enough to mark 2 centuries period.
Wow, that's something we don't think. We're so used to face things in a contemporary framework, right?
Yeah.
I mean, on one side, it gives us also somehow the perspective that maybe we, that humanity has gone through all of these few times, right? So I guess that's also a lesson learned, the idea that we have been there before, right? And
yeah. That means that population is not a linear growth, no? There are some accidents.
You mentioned the idea of using same methodology or same approach, for example, to study the Mesoamerican population. I imagine if the project is just at the beginning, you don't have results yet, but it's a very different situation, right? So I'm sure like even looking at all the historical signs and all of that, what do you expect there?
Well, the main point was to show the impact of the colonization on that population, on the native population. But I'm facing, well, my colleague and I are facing a methodological problem. That is the cranial deformation from pre-Hispanic population, because we use a biological indicator, which is the closure of cranial suture. And in Mexico, they use cranial deformation. So the crown was really oblong, very, and it's impossible to measure the same closer. And we are facing this point. For the colonial population, we can use the same method. And it's really interesting to see how the population in different parts of Mexico. I'm working with archaeologists and anthropologists. So we plan to study different regions of Mexico. So to see what was the behavior of the population in terms of mortality and surviving curve.
If you have to compare the impact of colonization, so human movement from one place to another, or natural causes like the climate change. I mean, I'm not talking about the current climate change, but like the cycles of climate change we had in history, or epidemics, or like pathogen agents. Which one is the strongest? Or is there a possibility to say which one is?
Yeah, they don't come alone. They always come with others. So it's very difficult to know which one was the first, which one has the most impact. But the difficulties are, well, I can measure that when there is a lot of difficulties, not just one, just a point in a cycle. But when there is a succession of difficulties, and so you have some climate difficulties, then some harvest and diet difficulties, so epidemic difficulties, and migration, poverty, and so on. And this conjunction makes a great impact on population. I can't measure just one. And the epidemic doesn't come, an epidemic wave didn't come alone, no? Exactly. In a context, in particular context.
My last question, do you see differences between people who are from the same time? I know you have a small sample, but even so, can you see differences between them? Like, I imagine there are impact of big events, like, again, as you say, a combination of climate or famine or something like that. But even within the same small population, are there differences you can see, or it's very difficult to see? I don't know, the level of nutrition or the way they lived or something like that. It's very difficult.
No, we can do it. It's one of research topic. What was the sanitary level of the population we study? But we have to face also with the bias on sampling, because it's not all the population. It's not hazard. Well, I don't know in English, sampling, hazard sampling also. So sometimes it's difficult just to know that in this symmetry, in this moment, there were a population with good sanitary condition, measured with diet and paleopathology, some paleopathological information. But it's difficult enough to do it for all my population. It's a lot of time and a lot of money that I haven't. But
Right.
we can do it in some very particular condition, like in a plague symmetry, because it's like a photographic instantaneous of the population. So this is, we are not faced off with the same statistical base.
Right.
But
Yeah,
they are
so
scared.
if you
They are
could
scared
choose,
people.
yeah, but if you could choose and pick the ideal situation, what would that be? Like a big group, how many, or I don't know, a city that has collapsed? I'm thinking of the things we know, like for example, a very big event. So when you have many people who unfortunately die at the same time, right? What would be the ideal site that you could?
What not a size, but my big deal will be with catastrophic event. A very short event, killing a part of population, but aléatoirement, not choosing one. And this is a good picture to have. We can have a good picture of the living population in this condition. It's for me the alone condition to know about the living population. If not, we are studying the kids, the death population. No, it's a very little and very scared discipline. No, discipline of demography. But just to know, to let know to people that they will leave information for the next centuries and and millennium. Even if they don't know, they can leave a lot of information after the way of living nowadays.